Military sexual trauma is an experience, not a diagnosis or a condition, and people react in a variety of ways that has a direct impact on the relationships we have with friends, extended family, intimate partners, and children. MST does not discriminate. People of all genders, ages, sexual orientations, racial and ethnic backgrounds, and branches of service have experienced this trauma. I'm Ashley Rabolja, and I'm a survivor of military sexual trauma. Because this is such a deeply personal issue to me, I've returned to host this special American Legion Tango Alpha Lima podcast series. As the American Legion shines a light on veteran suicide, we would be remiss if we did not discuss military sexual trauma, which we know is a pervasive problem with lasting effects on the mental health of survivors' family and community. In this series, be aware, we will be discussing topics that are sensitive and potentially triggering. So take a pause and take a break as needed. Join me as we explore the ramifications of MST, share the stories of resilience, and identify resources and tools for those in need of assistance. Together, we will celebrate triumph and tragedy. In the first episode of our special series, we'll start with an overview of military sexual trauma with two VA researchers who have studied MST for military sexual trauma extensively. Today, we'll be joined by Dr. Tara Galovski, the Director of Women's Health Sciences at the National Center for PTSD, and Dr. Amy Street, National Director of Military Sexual Trauma in the Office of Mental Health and Suicide Prevention. Both are also associate professors at the School of Medicine at Boston University. Welcome to the Tango Alpha Lima podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. Great to be here.
Excellent. I'm so excited. I love when I am surrounded by super smart women, like all the time. I'm just I'm the sponge. I want to know so many things. And as I've said in my previous tenure of the Tango Alpha Lima podcast, all of the things. So today we're going to talk about all of the things military sexual trauma. I want to hear about your story and getting into this field, and then also the relevancy of the research that's being done that the people need to know about. So we're going to go ahead and kick off by just both of you, brief introduction and summary of your experiences studying and researching MST. So I will throw it over to you, Dr. Street.
Thanks, Ashley. And call me Amy.
Amy. All right, Amy. Got you.
So first off, thanks to you. Thanks to the American Legion for doing this podcast series. I feel pretty passionately about the subject of military sexual trauma and particularly getting veterans connected to the care that they need. It's a tough thing to talk about. And so it doesn't get talked about a lot, but I actually feel pretty optimistic about this topic. And if we can just get survivors connected to the resources that they need, I think there's a lot of hope for recovery. And it's opportunities like this where we're all willing to get together and talk about all the things related to military sexual trauma that makes that happen. So thanks for this. I can tell you a little bit about what got me into this. I'm a clinical psychologist by training. And when I was in graduate school, I knew that what I wanted to study was interpersonal violence. And that was just something that had always felt pretty meaningful and pretty important to me. So many people's lives are touched by violence, just dramatically impacted in ways that felt life-changing, but also offering a path to recovery was equally life-changing. And I hadn't really thought about working with veterans or about military sexual trauma in particular, but I knew that if I was going to study interpersonal violence, I needed to know something about treating post-traumatic stress disorder because it's so commonly associated with experiences of violence. And so as part of my clinical training, I did some work through the New Orleans VA. And kind of just went in because I know the VA is really good at treating PTSD. I know that's where to go if you want to learn about how to treat PTSD most effectively. So that's how I ended up there. But during that experience, I learned how compelled I was by the VA mission and knew that that was something that I wanted to continue to make a focus of my work. So I've spent about 25 years in VA now, and much of that has been in Boston at the National Center for PTSD. And while I'm on the subject of Boston, let me give just a shout out to my local post, the J.W. Conway Bunker Hill Post 26, which I'm very proud to say is named in honor of my father-in-law. But so here in Boston, I've worked as a researcher, as an educator, as a clinician, working with veterans in recovery. And the through line through all of that has been a focus on veterans who've experienced military sexual trauma. I have just a real commitment to that issue. I think just feels like such a wrong that sexual trauma can happen to service members in this country. So it feels so important to be able to serve veterans who've had that experience, try to, in some small way, right that wrong. So I've had a long commitment to that issue, and it's because of that commitment I'm particularly excited that I have recently transitioned into this position of National Director for Military Sexual Trauma, in terms of being able to continue to set a vision and do amazing work more nationally for veterans who've had these experiences, and just the goal of making the best possible care that we can provide for those folks.
I love it. When you speak to mission and purpose, right? That's very fundamental in all service members, right? Regardless of what branch you serve. And it's always empowering to know that, we have such incredible VA employees that are, fighting the good fight, behind the scenes, making the stuff happen. Fighting the red tape and bureaucracy, right? Like, we want to help people. We are here to help people. And it comes from a very compassionate and meaningful place. I really appreciate just you sharing your story, and also kudos. Like, that's so cool. I love when people have Legion connections. And the fact that your father-in-law, like, that is so sweet, right? It's just, again, with community, right? With the American Legion and what we can instill and the values. Being value driven. So thank you, Amy.
I've been to many Legion events.
Yes. I will say I did see that you have judged multiple high school oratorical contests. So
yes,
fabulous.
Spent my time in the trenches judging those American Legion oratorical contests. Also hosted many an American Legion cotillion, I will say. Lots of sandwiches.
Lots of sandwiches. Yes, the best sandwiches. Being an Ohio gal, my Legion folks was always walleye fish fries. So when I hear those things, I'm like, where are we at? Are we getting some food right now? That's what we're doing? All right. So I appreciate you. All right, Tara, I'm going to throw over similar question, right? Introduce yourself, a little bit about your research background, how you kind of got started in this area, your expertise in researching military sexual trauma, PTSD.
Absolutely. Yeah. And thank you also. I want to echo Amy in having us here. This is just an amazing event. I have to say that I'm from upstate New York, and our post was not named after my father-in-law, but my father was a member. And one of my recollections was going and giving a talk on road rage to the members of the post, which was my dissertation. Totally random, but just great guys. We really had a blast that night. And I also, when I first came to VA Boston, I had the privilege to meet with the former National Commander Jake Comer and spend about an hour with him, and the stories he told from back in the day where there was no Blackberries, no phones, and just remarkable stories about how the GI Bill got passed, and it was really amazing. It just heightened my respect for the entire American Legion, and one of honestly the best experiences that I've had professionally in a long time. So thank you for having us here. This really means a lot.
Absolutely. We're a grassroots organization. So I've heard some of those stories as well. I have been at a dinner. I've just listened. I'm a sponge. I am.
That's it. It's just an honor to be there. It was truly amazing. I could have listened all day. So in terms of I had a little bit of a different career path than Amy. I started out working more in behavioral medicine. So understanding the relationship between stress and anxiety and our physical health and so forth. And what I found through the course of that study was that so much that there's such a trauma lens that really kind of permeates a lot of different kinds of manifestations of stress, manifestations of anxiety. And so my path took me down a road of understanding the implications of sexual trauma. Not necessarily just for veterans. So I started at the University of Missouri in St. Louis professionally, where I started my career developing interventions and treatments for PTSD. The vast majority of which occurred in our patient population, following interpersonal violence, primarily sexual trauma. And in the course of that work, we were developing cognitive processing therapy, which is one of the most evidence-based therapies now. That's where it was born and raised. And we saw veterans who are not VA engaged at that point. I was contracted by the VA to then go and roll out cognitive processing therapy across the VA. And I've had the privilege over the period of 10 years to train upwards of 1,000 clinicians across the VA and statewide and in other kinds of organizations that serve veterans both within and outside of the VA. And it has really been an amazing journey to really immerse myself in that particular mission and to really get to know this particular patient population. I have the utmost respect coming from a military family, and it really is just unbelievable. Then I had the opportunity to come and actually work full-time in the VA and had the honor of serving as the director of the Women's Health Sciences Division. And our mission continues this. So we really are looking at the psychological impact of military service on our women veterans. And that covers a wide berth of topics, but I continue to develop interventions and say, my kind of shtick in the game of research is to say, how can we take this beautiful intervention that someone developed, Patty Riesick, Edna Foa, and so forth, and how can we make this fit the person that's sitting across from us? Because therapy and mental health is not really amenable to a cookbook approach. So how can I twist and turn this and become as flexible as possible without diluting the potency of the intervention? And so that's the kind of research that I conduct now through the VA and also through Boston University.
It's very impressive. Those cookbook approach and without just diluting the potency, you're making me hungry, Tara. I love that. I love that. Like, it's such a beautiful way of describing, and you mentioned this trauma lens, and so much as a camera or wearing glasses, right? It's one of these things where, like, once you've been given that gift, right? Like, you can't take it away. You can't like necessarily always have others see what you see and what you've experienced. And it's nice to know that there is no cookie cutter approach to this, right? Like, everyone responds differently to different treatments. And I just want to go back really quick. So could you describe a little bit more in depth? I think you CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, just for audience sake.
Sure. The cognitive processing therapy is one of the treatments that has the most evidence or research trials behind it. Prolonged exposure is kind of neck and neck. So there's two different therapies. And cognitive processing therapy really seeks to understand the meaning that the trauma survivor has made of their experience. So we know that certainly not all trauma survivors, including absolutely MST, go on to develop long-term consequences that might equate to a mental health disorder like PTSD, but a substantial number do, right? There's no question about it. And so we try to, as a cognitive processing therapy therapist, we try to understand the meaning that trauma survivor is making about their experiences. That might be causing them to be stuck in their recovery, okay? And might be getting in the way of them not having PTSD, not having depression. And so we call those stuck points. So we're looking for beliefs that might cause them to be stuck. So for example, this sexual trauma happened because of the outfit that I was wearing. This happened because I did something wrong, right? So we're looking for those types of beliefs. And then through Socratic questions, we help the survivor to really unpack that and to really examine it for real evidence behind it. And if it actually doesn't hold water, then let's throw it out, right? And that way we open the door for recovery. So that's very simplistically put, but that is what we do in cognitive processing therapy. And I've personally treated hundreds of trauma survivors now, supervised hundreds of cases, and trained over 1,000 clinicians. And it is a process that unfolds and really can promote recovery. That's just one process, but that's an example.
Thank you. Very eloquently put. I am someone who has PTSD, someone who is unfortunately a statistic of MST. And, there have been so many different types of therapies that I've participated in. And it's always so nice to hear, like, again, having such passionate folks like yourselves that are on the forefront of making other people's lives better. So as someone who has gone through some of these treatments, I really do appreciate the amount of work that you do on them, because it's so important. Hearing these different treatments, right? How do you typically get folks to a point where they find the best treatment that works for them? Like, what does that process look like?
Ashley, I can tackle that one, but first let me just say thank you for sharing that about your history. I think the work that Tara and I and many, many others in the VA system and elsewhere do is incredibly important, but I think there is nothing more important than veterans coming out and saying, this is an experience that I've had, and this is the path that I followed, and it's possible for you to find your path too. I think that is one of the most powerful things that can happen. So thanks to you for sharing that with us, and more broadly. Each veteran's different, right? So, you alluded to your sort of path and trying to find what exactly the right path for you was. And for most people, that sometimes takes trying a few different things, waiting till you find the right thing at the right moment. And I think that's a little bit of a necessary process. And so because of that, and just to use another food reference, since we're all kind of hungry today.
Here for it. Yes, absolutely. I love food references.
It's not a cookie cutter, right? There's not a sort of one path that is the right path for every survivor. Every survivor's experience is different. Every survivor's story is different, and how every survivor is impacted is different. There are some commonalities across those experiences, but there's also a lot that's unique about every person. So because of that, we're really focused in VA on having a very sort of patient-centered, a very veteran-centered approach to recovery. So instead of saying, well, the first thing the veteran should do is this, and then the veteran should do this, and then the veteran should do this, we think about what's right for this veteran. So that could depend on how that veteran in particular was impacted. It can depend on what kind of approaches are appealing to that veteran, but the kinds of things that we often would recommend that a veteran consider is certainly thinking about informal sources of support, right? So friends, family, clergy, existing healthcare providers, that can be incredibly important. Thinking about what are the treatment goals and what are the kind of relevant issues that are going on. You mentioned PTSD. That's certainly very common for military sexual trauma survivors, but other comorbid conditions like depression or substance use, eating disorders, a whole range of different mental health conditions. We know that those things are increased risk for folks who've experienced military sexual trauma.
It's about that control. It's about control, and something I've had conversations with when I've been in groups. And one of the themes I've always heard is that because of that loss of control of the thing that happened to you, you try to control other things that are within your grasp, right? And as someone who's spent several years digging myself out of that that thought process, right? And I know that there's veterans out there who are still trying to like micro control things. And I can say from even just personal experience, like the only thing you control is the way that you respond. And that's a very stoic philosophy principle. And that's something that has really saved me. And just to hear like these comorbidity, these things that come with, right? Anxiety, depression, substance abuse, right? Like there are just sometimes like you don't realize that you're having this compulsive manic behavior because of the lack of control, right? Or a trigger, right? Like triggers are very different for everybody. Some people, it could be something as small as, as you mentioned, the thought processes earlier about like the clothing, right? Like there could be things that take you back that are said, or a situation that just brings up something secondary, tertiary to how you felt. And the next thing you know, you're spiraling into this thought process of negative self-talk. I think that's so important too, as we look at the therapies that can or cannot work for that individual, is like, how do we take those baby steps? And you've done just such a wonderful job explaining that. But I do have a question about, so how does the VA define military sexual trauma, right? Like just getting to the root of it, right? Because we've talked about some of the ways that, there's treatments, how we're not doing a cookie cutter approach, but how does the VA define military sexual trauma and so forth with, I know, let me digress. While I know it's challenging to have solid numbers, what does the research say about our frequency? Is it increasing, decreasing, steady? Why? So
I can talk a little bit about that, and then I bet Tara's got some thoughts to add from her experiences as well.
Mm-hmm.
But military sexual trauma, broadly speaking, sexual harassment or sexual assault that occurred during military service. So essentially any kind of unwanted sexual experience that occurred while serving. It could have happened on or off base. It could have happened on or off duty. Doesn't matter if the perpetrator was civilian, military, what have you. Any unwanted sexual experience, like sexual harassment or assault, that I called military service. Broad definition. And we know one of the ways that we know how frequently this is happening is through a big program that we have in VHA, where every veteran is screened by a healthcare provider for experiences of military sexual trauma. And this is a policy that started because we understand and appreciate how hard military sexual trauma can be to talk about, how hard it can be to bring up this experience. But we also know it's incredibly important for healthcare providers to know about this experience, both so that veterans can get access to the care that they want or need related to that experience, and because having had an experience like this in the past can really impact how you approach your healthcare as a healthcare user. So we want to know about these experiences, and we want veterans to feel like this is something that is okay to talk about. They'll get a good reaction, a helpful, supportive reaction when they bring it up. And so because of that, every veteran is screened for these experiences, male or female, because we know these are experiences that can happen to anyone, regardless of their gender, their race, their ethnicity, their age, their body size and shape and type, their sexual orientation. This is an experience that sadly can happen to anyone. So we ask all veterans about the experience. And we know from those numbers that 1 in 3 women who use the VA and 1 in 50 men who use the VA say that they've had an experience of military sexual trauma. If you compare those numbers to the numbers that you see on like anonymous research surveys, then the numbers on anonymous research surveys are even higher than that. And those numbers are probably the most accurate numbers, those anonymous research survey numbers. So our 1 in 3 and 1 in 50 may even be a bit of an underestimate. And we have seen those numbers go up over time, the 1 in 3 and 1 in 50. Those numbers have gotten higher over time, which probably doesn't reflect that that military sexual trauma is happening more frequently. We can't really tell it from these kinds of numbers. It at least in part reflects that we're doing a better job in VA creating opportunities for veterans to talk about these experiences, and that veterans are starting to feel more comfortable and able and safe to bring up these experiences with their providers, which is incredibly important, because if you can't talk about it, you can't take that next step to recovery.
Nail on the head there. I completely resonate with that. It's tough to have that initial conversation because it's something you bury very deep, and you just make layers and layers and layers, like an onion. For any of my Shrek fans out there, I'm an onion. Many people are onions. We have lots of layers. And knowing that the VA is kind of peeling back some of those layers makes me feel like a blooming onion. Here we go with food references all day. But I feel more like a blooming onion these days because I've been able to peel back those layers, and I've been able to have those conversations. And the more I've talked about, the more comfortable I've gotten, right? And this is just my experience. But, for veterans that are out there and they're having that trouble taking that first step, it's so important that there is an environment, and the VA has created a space where we can come forward and report this and like, yes, this happened to me. And that's the first step, right? Like, first step is sometimes just saying it out loud to yourself. Sometimes just looking in the mirror and being like, you know what, I've been through hell and I'm still here, and I'm going to give myself grace and kindness. And this is where I'm at, and I think it's so important. So important. Tara, I think.
No, I just resonating with what you're saying. And, in the VA, the providers, I've trained a lot of different providers, and I have to say, hands down, the VA providers are unbelievably across the board dedicated to this mission. And they're well trained in understanding the implications and the risk for military sexual trauma, which I think is something that's different in your general practitioner in the community. And they understand the amplified distress that a number of different variables that kind of surround a sexual trauma when you're in the military can lend to the overall consequences, living with or working so closely with your perpetrator. There's just aspects of military service that just aren't salient in the general population that really do amplify that distress. And so, as Amy was saying, just screening for those experiences and having the definition be as broad as it is within the VA, I think really does open that door that you're talking about, Ashley, to an awful lot of survivors.
Absolutely. And you touched on some things, like there's definitely some differences between, civilian and military populations. Like you said, serving with your perpetrator. I was someone who experienced that for 5 years. Like, that's wild. When I have shared that with people, they're like, well, why couldn't you leave? And I go, well, that's not the nature of the military, right? Like, you can put in a request, but it doesn't always mean that that's going to happen. And for some of my civilian folks who don't have any connection to the military, they're just like, well, that's absurd. That's wild. Why would that happen? It's like, well, there's differences in culture. And also I find that there are different cultures in each respected branch too. And for more like weird, random, things that just pop into my brain is how I explain stuff. But it's like Harry Potter. It's like the sorting hat. Like, certain personalities are drawn to different houses or different branches, right? And then each of those have their own set of values that are niche to and what have attracted you to that branch. And you create this culture, right? Also depends on your job, depends on, your life and background experiences. I always tell people the military is this beautiful mosaic of people from across the country with different backgrounds, ethnicities, religion, everything. So having that cross-sectionality, and then the culture, and then however long you're in, right? Like, that's a state of mind. And sometimes that's hard to break out of, because, if I ask a Marine, they're like, I'm not a former Marine. I am a Marine, right? There's a difference. For like an Army person, they're like, yeah, I'm retired. I'm good. Or I'm Air Force. Hey,
Not a Marine.
I'm here. I'll see you on par 9, whatever. Like, or par 9. I don't golf. So I'm sorry for all my golfers out there.
Hole 9, par 3. Let's go with par 3 and hole 9.
Par 3 and hole 9. There we go. Boom. See, Tara for the win. But yeah, I mean, you look at it from this cultural cross section of people, and I'm sure as a researcher, it's fascinating, right? Like, my background's in public health and communications, and I love this kind of stuff. So when I'm looking at the numbers, I'm seeing different people from all backgrounds, right? And the culture aspect. I'm a big nerd. I'm gonna just say that. I'm gonna say it out loud. I'm gonna own it. I'm a blooming onion. I'm a nerd, and I like Harry Potter.
Are you a Gryffindor?
You know what? I took the test, and I am not a Gryffindor.
I would have said you were a Gryffindor.
You know what? Most people, I'm flattered. I'm very flattered. But yeah, depends on the day. It could be a Ravenclaw and then Slytherin. So
Okay, fair.
all right, fair. You know. What about you, Amy? You got any Harry Potter quips for us?
Ravenclaw all the way.
See, Ravenclaw. See, okay, there we go. See,
Yeah.
now we're winning.
Yeah.
See,
right.
the houses in the VA: Ravenclaw, Gryffindor, Slytherin. I love it.
One thing I was thinking back on the piece Tara was saying before about that like trauma lens. Yeah. And Ashley, like relating that to what you were saying about how much you resonated to this feeling of being out of control. Mm-hmm. And when we're thinking about care for all trauma survivors, but I think military sexual trauma survivors in particular, using that kind of trauma sensitive or trauma informed lens, which in many cases I think comes down to this like appreciation for how much experiences of MST are about removing control in a really profound way, and understanding that this experience was about this complete loss of control on many levels, and often in the aftermath of the experience as well, this experience of loss of control, as you were saying, not being able to just quit your job and head over to someplace else to do something. It's
a lot of moral injury. A lot of moral injury that happens with that, and it follows
a sense of
you.
Betrayal, right?
Exactly.
Both interpersonally, someone else did a terrible thing, but institutionally, how is it that this organization that I trusted didn't protect me? All of that is so incredibly important in understanding this experience. And so I think as healthcare providers, if we can be aware of that dynamic and aware of what it felt like to have your control so profoundly taken from you, and proceed in a way that is like, let's give you choices, let's restore some of that control to you. This is possible, but let's think about what your options are. And it's why we believe so strongly that there is no cookie cutter approach, that maybe it's therapy for some folks focused on talking about the sexual trauma experience. For some folks, maybe it's about learning coping strategies. For some folks, maybe it's just kind of understanding what MST is and how it impacts people. Some people maybe want formal therapy, some people don't. The VA's developed a really lovely self-help app for military sexual trauma survivors. So if actually you talked about like it took you a while to be ready to talk about these experiences for people who aren't quite.
Took me 8 years. It took me 8 years.
Yeah.
That's not uncommon.
It was wild. It was the moment I went and did the what's it called? Where you do the claim 6 months out. Is it a DBT claim, or I'm messing up the acronym, but
I can't quite CNP.
Okay. So yeah, I remember it was May 1st of 2019. And I got out in November of 19. And I'll never forget that. I sat down for the first time in like a VA little cubicle, and I was talking to one of, the MST coordinators or whatever the title was at the time. Don't quote me there, but I sat down and I handed all of this paperwork, and she goes, "Can you take me through this?" And I said, "Okay. Do you have a Kleenex box?" She was like, "Okay." And I remember showing her the letters, the fabrication of things that happened to me, the witness letters, everything. And I remember going and giving all this to her. And it was probably one of the hardest and most relieving days of my life. And that did not come without trial and error. Like, I'm somebody who was denied for my claim, right? And sometimes that happens. And I want people to know out there that like sometimes it'll happen, but you can appeal, and continue to fight. And I wish that in every case, it was a first time go. And I say this, like, it's not a knock on the VA. Like, I understand. But I know how that felt. And I want listeners to know that, like, just appeal and keep pushing forward. Like, don't take it as an opportunity to just revert back into the shell, because now that you've let it out, like, just go with it and share that story. Like, I will never forget, like, the compassion that was provided to me in those times. And it's very, very powerful and it's meaningful. And I know a lot of people just struggle with that first step. And we've done such a great job here, just, explaining these different types of treatments, and really just helping people at the core is just where it's at. I've had a very interesting experience, and I share it openly because I want people to heal. I want people to grow and heal. And betrayal trauma is no joke. It's like I heard this more recently in something along the lines of an Instagram reel, but betrayal trauma is like being thrown from a plane and watching the people who have hurt you as you are falling and falling and falling, and they just keep going. They move on. They go to what, they just keep going. They don't turn back. They don't stop. And when you finally have that impact, it's like everything is broken inside of you, but you're still able to function, or not. And it can be devastating to the whole self-concept, and you have to rebuild yourself piece by piece by yourself. And that's how it feels. You don't always have to, right? But I would love to know a little bit more about if a veteran does a veteran need service connection to go through an MST claim. I think that would be really important, just as kind of like as we shift a little bit, because I know that's always a question.
That's actually one of the things, two things I wanted to comment on about what you just said, Ashley, that I think are important for people to know. One is, you said it took you 8 years. Tara said she's heard that's a similar stories many times, as have I.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to make the point that it is not ever too late, right? So for some people it's 2 years, for some it's 8, for some it's 12, for some it's 40. It is never too late to come forward to talk about these experiences and get help for them. So I think that's incredibly important for people to know. Everyone's moving on their own timeline. Mm-hmm. The other piece is, you talked about what it was like and how challenging it can be to go through that process of getting service connection related to experiences of MST. And I'm sorry that experience was so challenging for you in the way that I think it is for many. And also resonate with your recommendation for folks to continue fighting that fight. But I do want to be sure that people know that they are eligible to get services for MST related care, even if they've not gone through that benefits process, even if they've been denied for that benefits process. The two things are really disconnected. So any veteran who has experienced MST can get free care for any mental or physical health condition that's associated with that MST. Eligibility rules for that are very expansive. No service connection necessary. Even former service members who aren't eligible for other forms of VA care are often eligible for military sexual trauma related care. There is a military sexual trauma coordinator at every VA facility who can explain more about the intricacies of those eligibility requirements if anyone has specific questions. So I want people to know what they've earned, what they're eligible for, what options they have, if and when they decide that they want formal treatment to be part of their recovery process, which I think can be great for many people.
Ashley, can I just add, it also struck me the length of time it can take to take that first step, or take a second or third step as needed. And I just wanted to share that one of my most recent patients was a 75-year-old woman. Her granddaughter brought her in for treatment, and her assault had happened about 45 years ago. And I asked her, so why now? And she said, I think it's time to put this down. It's time to live a different way. And her granddaughter brought her to every single session, and she did remarkably well. But, just notably, it's on paper, it sounds like a really good idea to never think about the worst thing that happened to you, right? To put it into a box and shove it aside. But by definition, that's part of PTSD. That's avoidance, and breaking through it. It's what keeps us stuck, right? And breaking through it really does often have very good outcomes and really kind of get your control back, as you were talking about earlier. So I just want to highlight that. It was remarkable. After this patient and I shared a box of Kleenex, we got to work and we got it done. So it really is never too late.
I agree. I absolutely agree. I hope that everyone that is listening and watching understands that no matter where you are, you can always take that step forward and know that there is going to be people here to support you. And I know it's challenging and it's hard. And sometimes we want to self-isolate, just like you said, Tara, right? We want that control, and sometimes we'll resist, but I encourage everyone to take that leap forward and work on the self, because you know yourself, and healing is important. Healing is so important, and it will give you a new lease on life, right? Don't let trauma, chain you down. Because at the end of the day, you really can triumph from your trauma, and it's a beautiful process, and you will learn so much about yourself, so much about yourself. But I want to just kind of go ahead and start kind of wrap things up, but I would love to hear from both you, Amy and Tara, just kind of your final words to our audience and our listeners, right? Anything that we need to know, where we can find resources, how we contact, others, or, just your general advice.
I have a great website that I'll share with you. It's probably easier just to put it in the notes to make sure people can find it, but it's mentalhealth.va.gov/MST Home, which is a great place to just find all information about VA healthcare services for MST survivors. So it's where you can find a list of military sexual trauma coordinators at every facility, information about getting care at vet centers, information about our mobile self-help app for MST survivors called Beyond MST, all of those kinds of overviews of information for anybody who is looking for, maybe let me explore whether this is the right journey for me, where I can get more information. Mm-hmm. It's a great place to go. Actually, you've said it so beautifully in terms of encouraging people to think about taking this step forward. I don't think any of us are under the impression that this is easy. It's damn hard work, right? Mm-hmm. It's scary. You have to fight against every instinct telling you not to think about this stuff and not to talk about this stuff, but it is beautiful too when it happens. And I've seen it happen so many times. It's what keeps me going and doing this work, is that I know that it is possible for people. And I'm just so honored to be able to be one small part of making that happen for MST survivors.
Thank you.
I would just add that another place that folks can go to is ncptsd.va.gov, which is a National Center for PTSD website. And they've really done a fantastic job of developing an entire patient section. There's also a provider section, so it might be something that patients can also share with their providers if they're not aware of it. But the patient section has got just a ton of just great materials, from printable sheets, but really good descriptions of the different therapies. And they actually have videos of different actual patients who have been willing to talk about their experiences with different kinds of therapies that are available in the VA, and also certainly outside of the VA. So that I think it can help you to really experience and understand the different choices that you have available to you. But there's beyond that, there genuinely is quite a bit of really good information there on MST, on other kinds of trauma, and on all of the different kinds of consequences of trauma. And I just want to just to highlight again, Ashley, your very wise words. Taking that first step is tough and important. And I have found that probably the most important ingredient in all of this, beyond the clear courage and bravery, is really hope. If you can find your hope, and you only need a sliver, that is a good place to start from. And then you really can use that as a springboard towards recovery. And there's a lot of good people that have your back and are really willing to help in that process. It really is our honor and privilege.
I couldn't agree more. I have found that in my own rock bottom, and maybe others, that it's also a trampoline. Use it as a springboard. Like, that is an opportunity for you to aim for hope and to not stop. And as we've talked about this, trauma lens, imagine seeing one color, right, through the duration of, your experience. And then you finally decide to move forward, take that step. And the next thing you know, you're seeing two colors. And then through this beautiful healing process, you are now in this kaleidoscope of yourself and more awakened than you've ever been in a long time. And it's a beautiful, beautiful moment. And I wish that to everyone who is on this journey that, aim for hope. And, it's just going to be a beautiful experience. It's going to be tough. It's going to suck. It's going to suck. But you know what? Feel those feelings and push on and make the best of what is offered to you. And I want to say thank you on behalf of the American Legion, and just having your expertise here on the show. Alphas, you can find the rest of this special series in all 4 seasons of the Tango Alpha Lima podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, or wherever you consume podcasts. Subscribe on your favorite platform so you don't miss a single episode. And I just want to say thank you again, Tara and Amy, for being here. And we look forward to hopefully we'll have another conversation again. I would love this. This is great. I feel we can talk about Harry Potter more. I want to do that. I feel like that would be really great.
That would be.
So I just want to say thank you for joining us on today's episode.
Thanks, Ashley.
Thanks for listening to the Tango Alpha Lima special series. We understand that this content can be triggering. Please know that you are not alone. And if you are in crisis or in need of support, you don't have to be enrolled in VA to connect to the Veterans Crisis Line. Dial 988, then press 1 for 24/7 confidential crisis support.